If you're a homeowner, you probably look at a massive ancient oak tree in your yard and, well, you just see symbol of permanence,
Right,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, people see this picturesque piece of scenery shading the backyard.
Right, it's just perfectly framing the house. But to an arborist, that same tree looks, well, it looks like a ticking time bomb.
It really does. I mean, it's literally thousands of pounds of compromised structural engineering.
Yeah, just suspend directly over your roof, your driveway, and, your family. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are looking at a really comprehensive guide today from Hartford Tree Service, and it's on strategic canopy management. And I gotta say, our mission today is to completely upend how you look at the natural world right outside your window.
Yeah, it's going to change your perspective entirely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because by the time we're done here, you aren't gonna look at your yard as just like a place for weekend chores.
No, definitely not.
You're gonna look at the trees in your neighborhood the exact same way a structural engineer looks at a skyscraper.
It requires a massive shift in perspective, but, and I can't stress this enough, it's an incredibly necessary one.
Right.
Most property owners, they look at their landscape purely through this lens of aesthetics.
Yeah.
They want to know, like, are the leaves green? Is the shape pretty?
Yeah, does it have good curb appeal?
Exactly. But managing a property's canopy has very little to do with curb appeal. It is actually your absolute first line of defense against catastrophic property damage.
And localized ecosystem decline, according to the guide.
Right. We really have to strip away this whole idea of just making things look nice and step firmly into, well, the physics of structural integrity.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we are talking about structural integrity, we have to talk about the forces actively trying to tear that structure down.
The environmental stress test.
Yeah, the environmental stress test. And according to this guide, the environment, especially in a place like New England, is just relentless.
Oh, it's brutal.
We aren't just talking about a stiff breeze here. The text highlights this year-round cycle of weather extremes.
Yeah, the climate realities in places like Connecticut, they place this immense, continuous, and varying burden on the landscape.
Varying being the key word.
Exactly. A tree doesn't just have to survive one type of assault. It has to survive 3 or 4 completely different mechanical forces throughout the year.
Like what?
Well, you have heavy winter snowfall, severe ice accumulation, intense summer thunderstorms, and then, the remnants of tropical storms moving up the coast.
So let's isolate those forces because they obviously don't all attack the tree the same way. The guide mentions native species like your maples, oaks, and pines taking a serious beating from ice.
They really do.
And I used to think snow and ice just made branches heavy until they snapped. Like someone holding way too many grocery bags.
Right, just overloading them.
Yeah. But the physics of it are actually far more insidious, right? Like, I was thinking about this analogy while reading. It's like comparing these trees to athletes forced to stand on one leg.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. Standing on one leg while wearing weighted vests made of solid ice during a windstorm.
What's fascinating here is that analogy actually perfectly captures the mechanics of tree failure.
Really?
Yeah, because it is entirely about how the load is distributed.
Yeah.
People look at a thick trunk on, say, a mature maple, and they just assume it's invincible.
Right. It looks solid.
But ice accumulation doesn't attack the trunk. It attacks the horizontal levers.
The branches.
Exactly. Ice creates this static downward pull. It adds incredible, highly localized weight to branches that were, biologically speaking, engineered to hold ounces of leaves.
Wow, ounces of leaves, not like hundreds of pounds of solid ice.
Right, and when we look at evergreens, like those native pines you mentioned, the surface area makes it even worse.
Because of the needles.
Exactly. A bare maple branch might collect a layer of ice, but pine needles act like a net.
Oh, man, so they just catch everything.
They catch freezing rain, creating these massive blocks of ice at the furthest edge of the branch, which multiplies the downward leverage until the wood simply shatters.
That makes total sense for winter. But then the guide shifts to high winds, from summer thunderstorms or those tropical systems.
Right.
If ice is a static downward force, well, what is the wind doing?
Wind creates dynamic leverage.
Dynamic leverage.
Yeah, it doesn't just push down, it pushes laterally and violently across the entire surface area of the tree.
So it's hitting the whole canopy at once.
Exactly. When a massive gust hits a canopy, that kinetic energy doesn't just stay up in the leaves.
Where does it go?
It travels down the branches, into the main trunk, and all the way down to the root system. The tree is basically acting as a giant lever, and the root system is the fulcrum in the ground.
Oh, I see. So if the trunk is compromised by, like, internal rot, or if the canopy is improperly balanced.
Then the structural integrity of that lever fails under the dynamic load. It snaps.
Wow. So if the weather is this relentless enemy, and these trees are under constant mechanical siege, how do we actually reinforce them?
Well, that's the tricky part.
Right, because we can't exactly put a giant shield over a 60-foot oak tree.
No, we definitely can't do that.
So that brings us to the strategic response outlined in the source canopy management.
Yes.
The guide lists 3 primary objectives for branch removal. They are structural health, property safety, and visual appeal.
Notice where visual appeal sits on that list.
Dead last.
Right. It is an afterthought. The real work of an arborist is defensive engineering.
Defense through calculated elimination. So the first priority is eliminating dead, diseased, or crossing limbs. Now, I get removing dead wood, obviously, but crossing limbs.
Yeah, that one trips people up.
The guide specifically calls these out as a major threat. Why does it matter if 2 branches are just touching?
Well, think about those dynamic wind forces we just discussed. When a tree sways in the wind, those 2 crossing branches rub against each other.
Like friction.
Constant friction. And over time, that friction strips away the bark. Now, the bark is the tree's skin. It's its primary immune defense.
Oh, wow. So you're basically creating a permanent open wound.
Exactly. It becomes an entry point for airborne fungal spores, bacteria, and, wood-boring insects.
So the decay literally starts there.
Yes, and then it travels inward, eventually reaching the main trunk. So removing one of those crossing limbs isn't about making the tree look tidy.
It's preventative medicine.
Exactly. It stops decay from hollowing out the tree from the inside.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you read a term like canopy management, and you assume the entire focus is on the wood itself, right?
Sure, most people do.
But the text reveals that one of the most critical reasons for thinning a canopy actually has to do with the leaves and the grass below.
Yes, the microclimate.
The goal is to enhance airflow and sunlight penetration through the crown. And like the aha moment for me was realizing that improved air circulation acts basically like turning on a fan in a really damp bathroom.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it, actually.
Right.
Because fungal pathogens like powdery mildew or apple scab, they absolutely thrive in stagnant, humid environments.
Which a thick canopy creates.
Exactly. A severely overgrown, dense canopy traps moisture from morning dew or summer rain. By strategically removing specific branches, an arborist opens up channels for the wind to blow right through the center of the tree.
Which dries it out.
Right. It evaporates the moisture, changing the internal microclimate of the canopy so those pathogens simply cannot survive.
And it doesn't stop at the leaves either. By letting that sunlight penetrate the crown, you are actively managing the lawn below.
The turf health, yes.
Because a solid wall of leaves isn't just creating shade. I mean, it's literally starving the turf, right?
Yes, it is. Turf grasses require specific wavelengths of sunlight to photosynthesize effectively, primarily in the red and blue spectrums.
Okay.
A dense tree canopy absorbs almost all of that usable light. It only allows the green wavelengths to pass through to the ground.
Which the grass doesn't even use.
It is completely useless to the grass. You can water and fertilize your lawn all you want, but if the canopy above is acting as a solid light filter,
the ecosystem below will just die.
Exactly. Arborists are manipulating light and air to engineer a healthier environment from the top of the crown all the way down to the soil.
Okay, but as the homeowner living in this environment, how are you supposed to know when the tree actually needs this kind of engineering?
Well, you have to know what to look for.
Right, because if you wait until a severe Connecticut storm hits to realize your tree was compromised, you're going to end up with a massive emergency cleanup bill.
And potentially a branch in your living room.
Exactly.
Proactive observation is non-negotiable. Property owners need to understand the structural mechanics of their trees enough to spot the danger signs long before the barometer drops.
The source gives us a checklist of practical warning signs, and the first one seems pretty obvious: dead or decaying wood.
But they get specific.
Yeah, they do. They aren't just talking about a dry twig. They highlight branches that completely lack bark, limbs that appear hollowed out, and critically, branches that fail to produce leaves in the spring.
That last one is a massive red flag that people often miss.
Really? Just the lack of leaves?
Yes. Because if spring arrives, the rest of the tree greens up, and a large limb remains bare, its vascular system has completely failed.
A vascular system.
The xylem and phloem that transport water and nutrients. If those are gone, the wood is no longer pliable or resilient.
So it's just dead weight.
Literally just dead weight,
Mhm.
decaying from the inside out, suspended right over your property.
Scary. Okay, so the next warning sign is proximity, which feels like common sense, but apparently gets ignored constantly.
All the time?
Branches physically rubbing against house siding, hanging over roof shingles, or encroaching on power lines.
Homeowners often look at a branch hanging near their roof on a calm day and think, oh, his inch of clearance is fine.
Yeah, I've definitely thought that.
But what they fail to account for is the dynamic load we talked about earlier.
The wind.
Right. In a severe storm, a large branch can sway 3, 4, or even 5 feet in any direction.
Wow.
That inch of clearance vanishes instantly. The branch acts like a battering ram against your shingles and siding. Or worse, it shears a live utility line.
Now, the third danger sign mentioned in the guide is actually where I want to push back a little bit.
Oh.
Yeah, I am struggling to understand the logic here. The text lists density issues as a severe hazard.
Okay.
It says a canopy that blocks all sunlight from reaching the ground indicates severe overcrowding, which restricts wind flow and dramatically increases the chance of uprooting.
Yes, that's correct.
But wait, doesn't a thick, full, dense canopy mean the tree is incredibly healthy and thriving? Like, why on earth would we want to hack away at a perfectly healthy tree? Isn't a thick canopy exactly what you want?
It seems counterintuitive, I know. But a thriving canopy can actually be a tree's undoing if the structural mechanics aren't balanced.
How so?
Think about aerodynamics. This raises an important question about how trees handle wind. A healthy, properly managed tree should act like a filter for the wind.
A filter.
Right. The branches should sway individually, allowing the high-velocity air to pass literally through the crown, dissipating the kinetic energy.
Okay, I see. But if it's too dense?
If the canopy is just an impenetrable wall of leaves, it stops acting like a filter and starts acting like a solid sail.
Oh, a solid sail, like a boat.
Exactly. When a gale force wind hits that dense canopy, it can't pass through. So the tree absorbs 100% of that kinetic energy.
And going back to your lever analogy, all that force travels right down the trunk to the roots.
Precisely down to the root plate. And consider the weather conditions during a severe storm.
It's usually raining heavily.
Right. The soil is saturated, it's structurally weak. So you have maximum wind force pushing against a solid sail of a canopy, using the trunk as a massive lever pulling against roots anchored in wet mud.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. The mechanical advantage heavily favors the wind, and the entire root plate simply lifts right out of the ground. Strategic thinning removes that sail effect, allowing the wind to pass through harmlessly.
Wow. So you are literally venting the canopy to let the kinetic energy escape. That is brilliant engineering. Which brings us to the fourth, and definitely the most technical warning sign in the guide crotch angles.
Yes, crotch angles.
Specifically, the architectural difference between V-shaped crotches and U-shaped crotches.
This is where we look at how branches actually attach to the trunk. When a branch grows out of the main stem, the angle of that junction dictates its load-bearing capacity.
Okay.
A wide U-shaped angle is ideal. As the trunk and the branch grow thicker over the years, the wood fibers at a wide angle can interlock and grow strong together, creating a highly secure structural bond.
But the guide warns aggressively against narrow V-shaped crotches.
Because a V-shape creates a biological flaw known as included bark.
Included bark.
Imagine two branches growing upward at a very tight, narrow angle. As they expand in girth, they eventually touch.
Right. They run out of room.
Exactly. But because the angle is so tight, the bark on the inside of that V gets trapped between the two expanding branches.
So the wood fibers never actually interlock or fuse together?
No. There is no solid wood connecting them. There is just a seam of trapped, dead bark.
Wow.
As the branches continue to grow and push against each other, they are essentially acting as a slow-motion wedge, prying themselves apart.
And then you add New England weather to that wedge.
Exactly. Water flows down the branches, pools into that tight V shape, and when the temperature drops, it freezes and expands.
Driving the wedge even deeper.
Yes. Then a heavy snow load gets caught in the canopy, pulling the branches outward. Because there is no interlocking wood fiber to hold them together, that narrow attachment splits straight down the middle.
That makes perfect sense. This is why an arborist will target these V-shaped attachments during an assessment.
That's exactly why.
Okay, so you're looking at your yard, you spot a dead limb, maybe a scary-looking V-crotch, or a dense sail of a canopy. You recognize the structural threats. What happens next? Like, how do professionals actually intervene without killing the tree?
Well, the guide breaks the arborist's arsenal down into very distinct services. Understanding these distinctions is critical.
Because you don't just want someone with a chainsaw and a pickup truck randomly cutting branches.
Definitely not. You need a prescribed treatment plan.
The first major distinction the text makes is between trimming and pruning. I always thought those were synonyms, honestly.
A lot of people do.
But they serve completely different masters. Trimming is primarily for safety and spatial clearance, keeping branches off your house, your driveway, your power lines. And the guide says this can be done year-round.
Correct.
But pruning is an entirely different beast. Pruning is for biological health and structural yield. And the text specifically states the ideal time for this is late winter to early spring.
Yes, timing is everything.
But why? Wait. Like, if I see a structural issue in October, why shouldn't an arborist just prune it then?
It comes down to how a tree's vascular system behaves throughout the seasons. During late winter or early spring, before the buds break, deciduous trees are completely dormant. First, the lack of leaves gives the arborist complete visibility of the structural skeleton, making it much easier to identify those V-crotches or crossing limbs we talked about.
That makes sense.
But biologically, dormancy is when sap flow is at its absolute lowest.
Why does sap flow matter so much?
Because sap is essentially the tree's blood, and fresh cuts smell.
Oh, like they attract things.
Exactly. If you make a major pruning cut in the middle of summer, the tree bleeds sap heavily. That fresh sap acts as a chemical beacon, attracting destructive wood-boring pests and transmitting sap-borne diseases.
Like oak wilt, which the guide mentioned.
Right, which is highly active in the warmer months. By pruning in late winter, the pests are dormant, the fungal spores aren't active in the air, and the tree has time to prepare its defenses before the growing season begins.
So it's like scheduling a major surgery when the risk of infection in the hospital is at zero.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
But sometimes, surgery isn't enough to save the patient. The guide notes that if an inspection reveals extensive internal rot, a hollowed base, or a severely compromised root system, branch removal is no longer a viable option.
No, at that point you have to move to full removal to protect structures from complete failure.
And removal doesn't just mean cutting the trunk flush with the grass. The job isn't finished when the tree hits the ground.
No, absolutely not.
Right. The guide lists stump grounding as the final step, which honestly I just thought was a cosmetic upcharge to make the lawn look nice again.
Reclaiming usable yard space, yeah, that's part of it.
But the source points out this massive hidden biological benefit. Stump grinding specifically stops subterranean pests, like termites, from nesting near your home.
Yes, a decaying stump left in the ground is essentially a luxury high-rise for subterranean termites. They thrive in dead, moist wood.
Ugh, terrifying.
But here is the real threat.
Hmm.
A mature tree has a root system that extends far beyond the canopy drip line. When you leave the stump, those roots also slowly decay underground, creating a network of hollow subterranean highways.
Oh, man. So the termites just use the roots.
Termites use those decaying root channels to travel safely underground, completely undetected.
Right up to your house.
If one of those old roots happens to run toward your home's foundation, you have just provided pests with a direct protected route into your structural wood. Grinding out the stump destroys the hub of that network.
So zooming out and looking at this whole process, I have to ask a fundamental question.
Sure, go for it.
So what does this all mean for the tree itself? Doesn't hacking off limbs inherently harm the biological health of the organism? I mean, we are talking about taking heavy motorized blades to a living thing. How does a tree actually survive an amputation?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is where the biology is truly fascinating. Trees don't heal the way human skin does.
They don't.
No, they cannot regenerate the damaged tissue. Instead, they seal. The guide refers to a critical anatomical feature called the branch collar.
What is that exactly?
The branch collar is a slightly swollen ring of specialized trunk tissue that wraps around the very base of a branch where it meets the main stem.
Oh, I've seen that. The little bump at the base.
Exactly. It is packed with energy reserves and defensive chemicals. A trained arborist knows exactly how to identify this collar.
Okay.
When they make a clean, precise cut just outside that branch collar, without cutting into it, they trigger a biological defense mechanism known as compartmentalization.
So the tree recognizes the wound and activates a defense system.
Exactly. The specialized tissue in the branch collar rapidly grows over the cut, physically sealing the wound behind a wall of dense, heavily chemicalized wood.
Wow, so it blocks it off.
It literally builds a wall to prevent disease pathogens from entering the main trunk. And the energy that the tree was wasting trying to keep a failing branch alive is instantly redirected, promoting vigorous new growth in structurally sound directions.
So it doesn't harm the tree at all.
Not if done correctly, it optimizes it.
But executing that requires intense precision. You have to hit that exact spot just outside the collar.
Yes, which takes training.
And that brings us to the safety aspect, which the guide emphasizes heavily. This work introduces massive physical risk. We are talking about operating heavy chainsaws, high-capacity wood chippers, and aerial bucket lifts.
Often 60 or 70 feet in the air.
It is the definition of high-risk industrial work taking place in a residential backyard.
It really is.
The text specifically mentions the necessity of professional rigging. Because you aren't just cutting the branch, you have to manage gravity. You can't just let thousands of pounds of raw wood free fall onto a meticulously maintained lawn or a delicate hardscaping or a neighbor's roof.
This is where arborists transition into structural engineers again. They use complex friction cylinders, heavy-duty pulleys, and dynamic load lines to safely control descending wood.
Because it's heavy.
When you cut a 500-pound limb, the kinetic energy of that falling weight is immense. Rigging allows the arborist to capture that falling limb midair, absorb the shock through friction devices anchored in the base of the tree.
And then just lower it down.
Right? Slowly lower the payload to the ground without a single leaf touching the roof of the house below. It requires comprehensive training and, frankly, massive liability coverage.
It really puts the term tree care into a completely different perspective.
Oh.
We're talking about biology, aerodynamics, load-bearing physics, and high-altitude rigging.
It's an intense field.
So to summarize the maintenance timeline we've extracted from the source today, if you have mature, relatively healthy hardwood trees on your property, they require a professional structural assessment every 3 to 5 years.
Yes.
However, if you have fast-growing species, younger plantings that are still establishing their architecture, or any tree located directly over a structure.
You need to be doing an annual inspection for those.
Right, because as we've learned, the environmental stress test doesn't take a year off.
No, it certainly doesn't. Your canopy management shouldn't either. And, you know, I think there is a profound irony in all of this for you to mull over as we wrap up.
Ah.
We look at a wild, chaotic New England storm tearing through a neighborhood, and we cross our fingers, hoping our beautiful natural trees survive the destruction. But consider this. For a tree to actually survive the random, chaotic destruction of nature, it very often first requires the highly calculated surgical destruction of human chainsaw.
The intervention is what guarantees the survival.
Exactly. The majestic, ancient trees we admire towering over our historic neighborhoods might look like products of pure natural resilience. But in reality, they are very likely testaments to strategic, human-guided adaptation.
We are engineering their survival.
We really are.
Human-guided adaptation. That is an incredible way to look at the landscape. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
The next time you walk out your front door, look up at the canopies in your own neighborhood with fresh eyes. Don't just look for shade or pretty leaves. Look for the structural balance, see the aerodynamic strategy, and appreciate the hidden science keeping it all standing.